Welcome to DC Insiders, where we bring you sharp views about global issues with relevance to Taiwan from the political capital of the world here in Washington, DC. I'm your host, Wenchi Yu. In an era defined by rapid technological advancement and escalating great power rivalry, Taiwan's significance in the global order is evolving like never before. Positioned squarely at the crossroads of US-China competition, Taiwan is not only pivotal for semiconductor manufacturing, but is also exposed to the fast-growing arenas of strategic contest, from semiconductors and biotechnology to drones and other critical technologies. As the US, China, and other key players deepen their investments in emerging sectors, questions of security, economic resilience, and technological leadership grow more complex and urgent. Today, we're speaking to Mike Kuiken. He's a Hoover Institution scholar and the commissioner of the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission. He's a national security expert who has helped lead key policy responses in Washington. We'll explore why Taiwan is at the very heart of the US-China discussion, examine how new domains are redefining competition, and consider how Taiwan and its partners can remain resilient and innovative amid uncertainty. So welcome, Mike. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Wenchi. It's great to be here on this sunny day in Washington.
Yeah, well, thank you for bearing with us. As a commissioner of the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission, can you tell us what is sort of the discussion about Taiwan in this overall commissioner's work?
Every year we sort of do a laser focus on sort of 6 different topics, and then those different topics change each year. There's sort of 2 issues that always remain front and center in sort of the commission's work. One is Hong Kong, and the other one is, of course, Taiwan. And so when the report comes out in the coming days, you'll actually see a chapter on Taiwan, and it remains to be sort of a big focus. Focus is obviously part technology and part security, and obviously there's sort of economic elements to both of those. And the way we have evaluated it this year is that all indications sort of are that President Xi has told the Chinese military to be ready by 2027. And so the commission is sort of focused on how is the US government postured, how is the Taiwanese government postured, how is the Chinese government postured, and how do we sort of think about it in a holistic way. And that's sort of how we're looking at it this year.
Obviously, this commission focused on a lot of economic and security concerns, but over the last 25 years, how are the issues evolved? And especially, there's a lot of technology-related conversations, it seems.
First of all, I've only been a commissioner for a year and a half, so I do not want to say that I can speak for all 25 years. I think the biggest thing that sort of has changed is urgency. I think that people are starting to understand supply chains better. And when we look at the supply chains for really the entire globe, Taiwan has an incredible amount of influence on the economies of a lot of countries. And people always talk about advanced chips, but there's also about legacy chips. TSMC has done an incredible job of becoming a powerhouse in this space. And when you sort of unpack supply chains for everything from the cameras that we're sitting in front of, the computer in front of you, to the smaller chip that's in front of the phone in front of you, or the toaster oven that's in our respective houses. A lot of those chips are coming from either Taiwan or China. And if you're in sort of a, whether it's sort of a quiet conflict or a Cold War or a hot conflict with China, and you no longer have access to these chips, and a chip is really just a switch. And if people look around them, lights, everything, anything that is modern technology has one of these switches in it. And I think as people have unpacked these supply chains, they realize that Taiwan is a vital part of a lot of the economic and manufacturing capabilities of a lot of countries.
What's interesting for me to watch what the commission has been doing beyond technologies, chips, semiconductors, obviously, is also its attention to other parts of technology. So from space even to biotechnology. Yep. So can you share a little bit more about what some of the recent reports the commission, or issues that...
I mean, this year, the commission will talk to biotech, we'll talk to quantum, and we'll talk to space. We talked to a lot of other issues, but those are sort of 3 things that are in the commission's top 10 recommendations this year. Biotechnology, so let's just talk about that for a second. The world has really unpacked physics and chemistry as a general purpose science. I don't know where you went to high school, but where I went to high school, you had to take 3 sciences, or 3 sciences were available to you: physics, chemistry, biology.
Yes.
So we've essentially unpacked chemistry and physics as general purpose technologies. Biology has never been unpacked as a general purpose technology. And so as we think about biology and we think about what it can and can't do, the first thing we need to do is sort of unlock it as a general purpose technology. That allows you to sort of write the rules, write the standards, and essentially program in that technology. So we do that in chemistry already, we do that in physics, and so we don't do that right now in biology. So the commission has sort of unpacked biology as a strategic domain, and some of my work at the Hoover Institution has also focused on this. So unpacking it as a general purpose technology allows whoever is sort of gets there first to do that work. And remember, as we look around the trees around us, or the trees behind us, biology is the most evolved thing around us. And so if you can if you can essentially do the coding that you have on the software on your computer in biology, it is a powerful, powerful
So
tool.
is that where the US and China are competing for in terms of understanding biology? What are some of the things that they're competing?
So the thing I always ran into on Capitol Hill was that when I said biotech, everyone heard pharma. So the immediate sort of answer is, it's pharma, it's pharmaceuticals, and all sort of GLP-1s.
Which comes with a different sort of feeling.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone thinks pharma and they think, oh, pharma has all this money, they're doing so well. Why would we ever do anything to advance research in this space? In reality, biology and biotech are a lot more than that, right? There are materials. Think about latex. Latex is a natural material. Think about cement. If instead of tearing down mountains to get limestone, to cook the limestone, to get the cement, you can just grow the cement. That's an incredible capability. So people sort of have a narrow view of biotech, and really it's a much sort of wider and broader view.
What about space? Space exploration, both for national security as well as, sounds like, economic benefits. There's a lot in that space right now.
Yeah, Wenchi, you're pulling on my heartstrings today, biotech and now space. So space, to me, well, first of all, I always have to say, one of my favorite things growing up was watching Star Trek with my mother.
So you're one of those
yes,
guys.
I'm a space junkie.
Okay.
And so we had a hearing on it earlier this year. My co-chair was a guy named Cliff Sims, Republican appointee of Speaker Johnson. And it was exploring sort of multiple layers of sort of space, right? There's obviously civilian space, military space, and intelligence space. And we see what the Chinese are doing in launch, we see what we are doing in launch, we see the infrastructure layer, where are you launching from, and what are like sort of the ground crews and all of the associated infrastructure that you need to support that ecosystem, and then sort of racking and stacking, what does the Chinese ecosystem look like, and what does the American and Western ecosystem look like.
So the US is not far ahead when it comes to space?
No, listen, in space, I think the US is doing very well, but it's like two cars that are racing down a road, right? If I'm racing at 100 miles an hour and the car is catching up with me at 120 miles an hour, what's the trajectory of things, right? What's the trend?
Yeah. But what are some of the frontiers that we're talking about? Is it getting to the moon? Is it about getting to the Mars? Or what are satellites?
I think the answer is both, right? So the amount of fuel that it takes you to get from Earth to the moon, it actually takes you less to get from the moon to Mars than it does from Earth to Mars. So a lot of people that observe sort of the technology development in this area say, like, listen, the first thing we need to do is we need to get to the moon, we need to build infrastructure on the moon, we need to sustain life, and figure out how we are then going to do launches from the moon. That is sort of like pretty far out there, but that's how you sort of have to think about the development over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
So what are we competing with China about? Why isn't it something that we can see it as a sort of a human kind, trying to...
It'd be great if we thought about it that way, Wenchi. Could you imagine if you sort of had combined resources and a single objective?
So what is the challenge?
I don't think that that's really where we are right now. What we're actually seeing in space, and we observed this at the Commission's hearing, is a lot of the international bodies that have traditionally sort of regulated space, like the ITU, the rules of the road are being wildly disregarded by the Chinese in low Earth orbit. And so, it's easy to have a conversation about cooperation when you sort of see, we both see this iPhone and we think about it the same way, but when we don't observe the rules of the road in the same way, you run into troubles.
Yeah, so other than perhaps them not following or complying with international norms, what are the other global security kind of implications?
Listen, there's a lot of worry about weaponizing space. So that's obviously an issue that all policymakers here in Washington keep their eyes on all the time.
How could space be weaponized?
Watch Star Trek. No, I'm joking. There's all kinds of opportunities here, but like a few years ago, we saw the Chinese deploy their FOB, the fractional orbital bombardment capability in space. So hypersonic, weapons launched from space. There's a lot of sort of things that have been considered over the years. I don't know where the Chinese are in terms of any of these developments. I can't speak to where we are in any of these developments, but there is opportunity to weaponize space, and it's something that we should speak to in opposition to. And be thoughtful about.
There's some concern about U.S. government, NASA, or other related agencies' capabilities these days, and even resources. Do we have the right resources? Is the government the best place to actually help, support or even innovate? And I've heard different voice around that. Some even suggest that all these things should be done by the private sector. You have a view?
I do. Listen, I've visited NASA's infrastructure and facilities all over the country when I was in my last job. NASA is an innovation powerhouse. They have done some of the most incredible things in space and in aerospace. Like, people forget that they do planes and outer space. And they've made innovations that have made Boeing's products better, that have made launch capabilities more interesting. I know SpaceX has benefited from their work, whether it's on the sort of human part of space exploration or on the launch piece of it. So I'm a huge advocate for NASA. I believe that they do incredible work. If you see some of the facilities that they have for replicating sort of the conditions of space, right down the street in Goddard, right down the street in Maryland from here, Goddard, NASA's facility here, it's incredible. So
the government does and should still play a role.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, anytime you talk about sort of the innovation ecosystem, I always think about sort of several layers, right? There's foundational science. There's like sort of the curiosity-driven foundational research, things where we believe there's opportunity and things where we know there are opportunity. And NASA has been in that space, DoD's in that space, the intelligence community's in that space, and then other parts of the government are in that ecosystem. And at some point, there does need to be a handoff or a partnership with the private sector. And we should always have sort of a thoughtful conversation about that. But I believe that there is a role for the government. And as you think about, the last 80 years of our nation, there's an incredible ecosystem that has the government funding basic research, the government funding some of that sort of stage 2 research, and then the private sector sort of taking with it and running with it.
Well, we can talk about government funding for research forever, but I want to shift to the next topic. Chips and Science Act, in which I know you were, behind it and played a key role. And that's also a topic that Taiwan pays a lot of attention to, obviously, because of semiconductors. Tell us a little bit about your view of this, meaning the Trump administration's policy or lack of on semiconductors.
Listen, I think Chips and Science bill was passed a number of years ago, obviously by the Biden by Senator Schumer and Congress. It was a vitally important bill. It was both about talking about chips and about science, right? And we sort of already had the conversation about science. In the chips ecosystem, it's obviously incredibly important to sort of build a domestic capability here in the United States, and a lot of that stuff is happening. I think the thing that you're seeing the Trump administration do is, where did the Biden administration get it right? Where did they get in their assessment wrong? And how do we sort of continue down this road, maybe with some modifications? And I think that's the trajectory we're largely on.
Can you be more specific about that?
I mean, you can see that they've changed the way some of the programs were managed. That's sort of that's not really a political decision or a policy decision. That's just we'd prefer to do it this way decision, from what I can tell. That's one of the biggest changes they've made. Obviously.
You mean primarily about giving grants to companies?
Oh no, I was just going to get to that. So the other piece we've obviously seen change a little bit is that the administration has taken shares in some companies. There's nothing in the Chips and Science Act that prohibited that. There was actually a conversation about this issue when we were developing the Chips and Science.
Even back then.
Yeah,
in the
about
Biden
whether or not warrants should be part of the conversation. The Congress ultimately decided that they didn't want to do that, but we didn't prohibit it, and we didn't prohibit anything with respect to shares. So I think the Trump administration has just done things differently, and people can decide to agree or disagree with that approach, but that's how they've decided to do it.
That's an important. Why did the Congress decide not to include that in the legislation?
I don't recall all the conversations, but I think it basically came down to some people said no, some people said yes, and nobody really wanted to.
So it's not a philosophical difference in terms of
I don't remember
what
any
the government's role should be in private sector business.
No, my recollection of the conversation was it didn't even get far enough to that point to have sort of the philosophical, here's how we feel, and here's the hills we're going to die on. None of that really, we never got to that point.
But a key part of, a lot of those semiconductor policy related conversations is also export controls. And what is your view on export controls?
So listen, on export controls, we did not do a lot in chips and science. We had one section of chips and science that related to this issue in a very direct way, but we were largely deferential to the executive branch in terms of how it was implemented. And you can see the Trump administration and the Biden administration have sort of taken those rules and run with them, and they continue to do work in that space. And it's like, I don't know when your show is airing, Wenchi, but it could change by the time it airs. So I would say, I think everyone knows that export controls do work. I think export controls, when implemented in a rigorous way, are effective. It's obviously a policy and political decision as to whether or not you use that tool, but they are effective. Effective in slowing the flow of whatever it is you're deciding to control. So, for purpose of this conversation, it's chips, right? Export controls historically have been used for all kinds of things, but when we do implement them and we do sort of have a regime that is sort of very meticulous in its implementation, they do work in slowing or stopping the flow of the product that you're trying to control.
So in this case specifically, it is trying to slow down China's development when it comes to advanced chips.
The purpose of the controls, as I understand it, is to slow their advance in various spaces. Now, saying it that way, I know is sometimes controversial, but it is absolutely, in my view, the intent.
And you think that's been working? Can I just?
I think. Oh, you're trying to nail me down
yes.
here, Wenchi. Yes, I think when the executive branch and the Bureau of Industry and Security observe export controls, they make decisions about it and they implement it. So they enforce it. They do work, right? Industry is responsive to export controls. So yes, I think they do work when they are implemented. What they look like, what they control, obviously that's sort of an ongoing conversation, but they do work.
I do want to follow up on this because there are, as you know, various questions about the effectiveness of export controls. One would say, yes, you slow down China for a little bit, but you almost alarm them, and therefore they accelerate in other ways. And so you will not be able to stop them. Instead, you help them advance much faster. And we've seen that in both semiconductors as well as in the case of Huawei and some other companies. They come back and even stronger. So that's one question I have. And then the second is, China also seems to be copying the US export controls, and we've seen that in their use of rare earth as a weapon. And that definitely hurts America and the world. And so do you still think it's effective? I mean, it depends on how you look at it.
Yeah, right? So listen, one of the Commission's recommendations this year relates to economic statecraft. And everything that you just sort of walked through as I was sort of listening to you and sort of trying to figure out how I was going to respond to you is like, listen, that's all economic statecraft. Whether it's our export controls or their controls on critical minerals, all of that is basically a cycle that we see anytime there's a conflict. It's measure, countermeasure, measure, countermeasure. And listen, I think we're in for a long cycle of measures and countermeasures between the United States and China. And we're seeing that play out in the news. Who knows what will happen by the time this airs, but we're seeing that play out every day.
And you think this is going to continue for a while. We have also seen that both countries kind of have to walk it back, right? We see that from the summit between President Xi and President Trump in order to de-escalate this kind of tensions.
Yep.
Is it just going to be like this and then back? Escalate?
I mean, like, listen, folks always hope that we're not going to continue to go through that cycle, and that's the cycle I talked about. Measure, countermeasure, measure, countermeasure. And so
at what point will these two countries find its own balance?
Yeah, like where's the equilibrium?
Yes.
I mean, the answer is not simple, right? I don't think we know where equilibrium is yet. I think the observation you had with respect to, it alarms folks in Beijing and that makes them accelerate. I mean, like there's acceleration going on here in Washington too, right? There's all kinds of investment in the defense budget over the last few years, and all of it sort of is not singularly focused, but a lot of it is focused on what do we do in the Indo-Pacific. And so there's alarm bells going off here too. And I think you always hope that leaders are responsible and think about these issues in a real and thoughtful way, and that's sort of what's playing out.
Well, you also have another role with the Hoover Institution
Yes.
as a scholar. So for both Hoover as well as the Commission, um, really look at a lot of economic issues through the national security lens. So you've touched on many, actually, very critical issues. What are we not paying attention to that are going to emerge as key issues and topics that the world should be aware of?
Listen, we've already touched on one of them, is biotech. I mean, I think you've seen senators on the Hill sort of raise alarm about the level of dependency that the U.S. has on China for API and active pharmaceutical ingredients and what they call KSM, or key starting materials. And this is all in the pharmaceutical space.
That's more on the manufacturing side of things, or?
Yeah, that's on the manufacturing
right.
of pharmaceuticals,
Right.
right? And so there's been a lot of concern raised about that issue. I know Senator Cotton has done some work in this space, so that's something that folks on Capitol Hill are monitoring. And from a supply chain perspective, whether it's pharmaceuticals for civilians or pharmaceuticals for military service members that are, in theater and responding to a conflict, those are real issues. So I think that's one of the things that sort of raises concerns. And then, listen, China, to their credit, has become a manufacturing powerhouse in terms of pharmaceuticals. Everything, but for purposes of biotech, is for pharmaceuticals.
Is it why Trump imposed this percentage of tariff on pharmaceutical? Is it targeting China, or
I
is
honestly
it more
don't know all of the background on the Trump pharmaceutical tariff piece of it, but I'm sure it was part of the conversation.
Okay.
So, but I wouldn't want to speak for the Trump administration. The other area that in biotech that is something where education is needed is just bioliteracy. Like, how do you think about it? How do you be thoughtful about it? Other areas where people, I think, are paying attention, but not necessarily as much as we should be. Quantum. There are three areas of quantum: compute, sensing, and communications. Quantum computing is obviously incredibly important for the ability to sort of do encryption and to advance sort of scientific research. Then sensing is incredibly promising because you have the opportunity essentially to do mining research better, to do medical sensing better. So there's a lot of opportunity there. I think quantum communications is a little further off, but the Chinese have done some pretty impressive things. And then the other area where folks are paying attention, but don't think there's been enough sort of conversation about the convergence, is AI. And so everyone's talking about chips. We've just talked about chips. Everyone's watching all the announcements about more data centers, more data centers. There's going to be a convergence in this space where we see AI, biotech, and quantum start converging. And
what's that going to look like?
So start thinking about, everyone talks about automation, right? Think about it. When do we get to a point where there's almost like an autonomous cycle of scientific innovation? And the country that unlocks that sort of capability, and it'll likely be some combination of those things, there's real opportunity.
Is that happening in the United States?
There are, obviously there's lots of people working on quantum, there's lots of people working on biotech, and there's a lot of people these days getting paid very well to work on artificial intelligence. So I think these are ecosystems that are developing almost as like parallel stovepipes, and at some point you're going to start seeing crossovers. Here's an example. There's a researcher, his name's Brian He from Stanford. He has done some incredible research to develop an open source biotech large language model. So that's already where you're seeing the convergence of sort of capabilities across the ecosystem.
Are you worried about research funding cuts in this administration?
Listen, one of the things we tried to do during Chips and Science was dramatically increase the amount of funding going into science. So that's thing one. Thing two, I always sort of think about, and we called the original Chips and Science bill the Endless Frontier Act. And if you rewind the calendar 80 years, there was this guy in the Truman administration and the FDR administration named Vannevar Bush. He wrote a report that was sort of famously talked about what we were going to do with this innovation machine we created in response to World War II. And the answer was the National Science Foundation. Okay, and so the investments in the defense industry during the war obviously led to sort of Western or the democratic world's victory over Germany. That's the first important piece. We then took that machine and refocused it on keeping that flywheel of innovation going over the course of 80 years, right? That meant investing in universities, making sure there were a startup ecosystem to support those professors, making sure that those startups got sort of consumed.
That's like decades of building the infrastructure.
No joke, 80 years.
Yes.
It's 80 years of a flywheel that's been going. And so one of the things that we tried to do with science, and we had some success and some failures in this space, was we tried to sort of reinvigorate that flywheel. And I think anytime we're taking money out of science, or even flattening money going into science, I think we're sort of starving that ecosystem of sort of what it needs. And I think I said recently that ecosystem doesn't run on fairy dust. It runs on money. Yeah. And so government plays a role there. Obviously, industry plays a role there as well, because there's a scaling part of research. But that conversation needs to be had within the government as well.
And can Taiwan play a role in being helpful to this whole ecosystem?
Listen, I've visited TSMC, I've visited some of the other companies in Taiwan over the years. They are a manufacturing powerhouse and an innovation powerhouse. And I think anytime we're partnering with the Taiwanese in whether it's chips or other areas of innovation, there's always success that comes out of that.
Well, thank you so much for really, helping our audience understand what the Commission is now focused on. Some of the cutting edge technologies and economic issues. How does the U.S. Congress look at those issues? And hopefully, it'll help our audience understand what's coming out of Washington, D.C. better and the conversation. So really appreciate your joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Wenchi.
Thank you for watching DC Insiders. Please follow us on social media to get the latest episode. See you next time.
Is there a place you've been searching for?
We bring you stories, not just to Taiwan,
Exploring the issues that matter to you. This is a journey that will move you. Our stories are all connected. TaiwanPlus.